October 17, 2013, 7:42 p.m., Butte, Montana. A young man in a flannel jacket steps into the Silver Bow County office and drops a stack of Polaroids on Deputy Rowan Hale's desk. He says he found a sealed room under the old Copper Creek transitional home. Rowan's pen stops mid-stroke. 30 years earlier, September 23, 1983, 9:10 p.m., her brother, Noah, walked into Copper Creek and vanished. What happened to Noah Hale and to the other adults who signed in but never signed out? 3 decades later, a wall gives way and a story breathes. One small code may be louder than any confession. Evan Pike doesn't look like trouble. He looks like someone who climbs fences because locked doors irritate him. His hands are nicked white from old wire cuts. His eyes tremble with the heat of having seen something he cannot file as a prank. He slides the first photo forward. It's a concrete room, 12 by maybe 15 feet, built beneath a building that was supposed to help adults get back on their feet. Rowan notes the restraint straps, the dented file drawers, the way the flash paints the mortar seem a slightly different color. The second photo shows the hole he hammered through. The third, a header on aging paper, client transfer authorization, Copper Creek Transitional Home, 1983. A penciled margin note shadows the type, PS 7. Another mark circles a designation that empties her throat of air. 21. Rowan hears the room change. The fluorescent buzz feels too loud. She does what she always does when facts collide with memory. She lists. Copper Creek was not a children's home. It took in adults, 18 to 24, off the streets and out of the mines when shifts dried up. Noah had turned 19 a week earlier, had argued with their mother, Marion, about a bus ticket to Missoula. He said he'd spend a few nights at Copper Creek and figure things out. He never called. He never cashed the ticket. The Hale family learned quickly how a town can be generous with casseroles and stingy with answers. Now Evan points to a fourth photo. A shelf, a sliver of stainless steel wedged between rust and dust. I didn't touch it, he says. But there's something stamped on the edge. Rowan nods, because she is already standing, already reaching for her jacket, already feeling the old road to Copper Creek rising through her bones like the shaft ladder in an abandoned drift. She leaves the station with Evan and a camera, no siren, no backup. The sky over Butte is a shade of copper ash that only October gets right. The building sits at the end of a cracked lot, its windows blinded by plywood, its gutters sagging like bad stitches. It does not look haunted. It looks patient. Inside, the air tastes like iodine and damp insulation. Their lights snag on a torn evacuation map pinned beside a corkboard furred with mold. Someone, years ago, drew a loop around the East Wing basement and initialed the loop with a neat PS. The stairs down complain like old knees. At the landing, Evan lifts the temporary plywood he used to mask his entrance, and the smell tightens. Metal, paper rot, a sourness that can only be the long breath of a sealed space. Rowan lowers herself through the rough square and rolls a shoulder to pass, her forearm brushing brick that crumbles into her palm. She remembers Noah's laugh pitching low when he was trying not to wake her. She doesn't push that memory away. She lets it walk beside her. The hidden room is smaller than the photograph promised, because walls press closer in person. The beds are not many, only 2, but 2 are enough to say what no memo ever will. A cabinet drawer resists and then yields. The folders inside are fat, the paper brittle at the corners. Names are blacked out in places, but the stamped forms don't lie about dates. June 7th, August 12th, September 23rd. Always 1983. Each file repeats a pattern. Adult intake, reclassification, transfer. The handwriting that sneaks into the margins fights the printed line with a different truth. Stable. Oriented. Exhibits normal effect. Then a new line, harder, reassign PS 7. Rowan doesn't know what PS 7 is yet. She knows it is not an address. She knows it is a door. Evan reaches for the shelf where the steel glints. It isn't a knife or a tool. It's a narrow bracelet, scuffed. On the edge, someone once hammered shallow marks. Rowan turns it in her fingers. K, 21. 21 for his age? No, the bracelet is older. Her father had a habit, He cut a tiny notch into the inside of every family tool and tag, a stamp only they would recognize. The inside of this band carries a twin notch. She sees her father in the garage, heavy hands gentle with metal, and she is suddenly not in the room at all but in the doorway of that night when Noah promised to be back by Sunday. The bracelet is cold. The notch is warm. Protocol says call it in. Seal the scene. Wait for a detective with a better suit. Rowan breaks protocol. She photographs everything, even the dust light moving across the floor as the vent coughs. She whispers dates into the mic, pinpoints the seam where new mortar kisses old, pulls one copy of a transfer form and slides it flat into a rigid sleeve. She does not say Noah's name out loud. She does not need to. Evan watches her measure time with angles and labels. He asks what K21 means. She says it might mean everything or nothing. She says sometimes a code is a mask and sometimes it's a map. Then she does the only reckless thing the evening allows. She follows the map. A diagram tacked behind the cabinet shows hallways as arteries and arrows as flow. One line leads out of the room and into a corridor that isn't on the original floor plan. A pencil note says Building C with a small, precise star drawn beside it. Bowen Road bends toward the state line from here. Idaho is a long night away if you drive it wrong. She stands in the doorway, counting breaths. Dust lifts and falls. Metal cools. Somewhere, a minute breaks. She looks at the bracelet again, at the stubborn stamp no eraser touched, and asks the question that started all this walking. If K21 is a person who signed the order that erased his name. Outside, a single light over the loading dock blinks once and steadies. Inside, the mortar seam isn't the only thing that looks new. One marked drawer wasn't meant to stay closed forever. The bracelet stayed with Rowan, wrapped in a small evidence sleeve that felt heavier than its grams. She logged the room, photographed every seam and scrape, and left Copper Creek with Evan walking a pace behind her, as if sound might break whatever thin thing had just formed between the past and the present. At home, she laid the sleeve on her kitchen table beside a stack of forms and a yellow legal pad and began writing requests the way some people pray, with a rhythm that refuses to stop. 2 FOIA filings went to Helena before midnight, one for Copper Creek's 1981 to 1983 budgets and contracts, another for medical transports billed to Silver Bow County in that same window. She filed a third to the state archives for licensing records, inspection notes, and any Program 7 references under alternative names. She didn't know the right tree yet, so she shook the whole line. The replies weren't immediate, but the town was. Butte has longer memory than it admits. An old ham radio operator, Ray Delaney, still kept paper logs like ledger books. In his basement, beside a coil of copper and a coffee pot that had outlived 3 receivers, Ray pulled 1983 down from a shelf and traced a finger along pencil marks. September 23, 2:14 a.m., he'd recorded an unusual convoy on Homestake Pass. 2 box ambulances, 1 panel truck, low beam, no chatter on open frequencies, which he'd found odd. He tapped a margin note, no plate lights. The silence, he said, told him more than noise. He hadn't thought about it in 30 years. Now it felt like a transmission finally clearing the static. Back at the station, Rowan signed out a microcassette player from the evidence cage and fed a tape she'd bagged from Copper Creek's basement into the slot. The tape was labeled simply, Intake, September. The room's speaker hissed, then cotton-mouthed voices settled onto the line. A metronomic tick in the background, maybe a wall clock, cut the speech into precise pieces. Client presents calm, a woman read, cooperative, oriented. A second voice, male, recoded the words into something else, reclassified to specialized, transfer pending. The words were bureaucratic, but the rhythm made Rowan's skin go cold. Nothing in the voice sounded like help. The first batch of documents arrived the following afternoon, scanned in gray and truth-shaped. Copper Creek's ledger showed a jump in special services disbursements during the summer of 1983, paid to a private transport firm that had no website and no current registration. Inspection notes from the state carried a bland tone, then a sudden gap. No entries after September, no closure summary, no dissolution notice. Rowan circled a line item chalked up as Behavioral Assessments, Contractor, tied to a medical ID belonging to Dr. Lionel Keats. She knew the name from old rotary photos. Keats had been the doctor you called for school sports physicals, for stitches after a kitchen slip, for any small, survivable damage. He also, it turned out, signed every reclassification she'd seen. Rowan drove to her mother's house with a stack of copies and the bracelet, because procedure wasn't the only thread that needed pulling. Marion listened without moving much, hands linked at the knuckles the way she did when she was bracing against weather. The bus ticket Noah never used had lived in Marion's recipe box for 30 years, folded beneath a card for lemon bars. Rowan unfolded it, placed it beside the bracelet, and watched two small proofs of different kinds of faith share a rectangle of wood. She didn't promise anything. She said, quietly, that the dates aligned and the code wasn't random. Marion said nothing for a long minute, then pulled a shoebox from the hall closet and set it down. Inside lay a strip of dog tags, a handful of Polaroids, and a 3x5 card in their father's tidy print. K equals family mark. Keep close. The call from Helena came as Rowan backed out of the driveway. The analyst on the line sounded surprised at her own findings. Copper Creek's behavioral assessments, money moved through a health foundation that leased part of a disused campus in Lemhi County, Idaho, to a private operator named Granite Ridge Services. The lease never appeared in public minutes. A scanned memo referenced Building C reconfiguration and secure intake routing. Rowan gripped the wheel until her fingers ached. Triangle points connected themselves. Building C had been penciled on the diagram in the hidden room. Idaho had been a rumor in Ray's log. Granite Ridge had been a whisper, now a name. She briefed Detective Cole Ramirez at the state level and asked for a soft look into Granite Ridge, utilities, shell companies, any inspection that got canceled without note. He agreed, then asked the question that always comes before a storm. Do you want this to go wide now? Rowan shook her head, knowing he couldn't see it, and said what she'd been circling since the first Polaroid hit her desk. If you care about cases that wake up after decades and step into your kitchen like they never left, keep your focus here for a minute longer. Some answers run when you turn on the lights too fast. That night, Rowan went back to Copper Creek alone. She needed the room without anyone else's breath in it. The seam looked younger than the wall older than the floor, the whole thing older than the town's patience. She crouched by the cabinet she had left closed on purpose and rolled the drawer again. Something had wedged behind the file hangers, a manila folder buckled by time. It slid free after a stubborn second, as if the paper had been holding its own tongue. Inside, she found 6 death certificates dated across late summer and fall of 1983, all bearing the same signature, Lionel Keats, MD. The causes were vague, the language careful. Rowan read the margins instead. Pencil had been pressed hard enough to score the paper. 2 letters and a number appeared again and again, the way a bruise repeats a shape. PS 7. She photographed the sheets, slid them back into plastic, and stood with the bracelet warm from her palm. She could feel the case shifting, like or under a pick when it finally fractures along a seam you couldn't see. The room seemed to lean toward her. She leaned back. Then, from somewhere above the basement, a board moved and settled, not like a building breathing, but like a person deciding where to step next. Microhook. Someone else knew which drawer she would open, and they were already inside. Rowan didn't sleep. She watched the bracelet on the nightstand like it might change shape if she blinked too long, then drove at first light to a narrow street 2 blocks from St. Anne's, where lace curtains never aged and porch rails stayed white out of habit. Agnes Caro opened the door with a hostess's smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was the kind of woman a small city trusts to organize casseroles and budgets. Steady voice, neat cardigan, a calendar wall marked in ink. Rowan introduced herself, kept the conversation soft, and let the older woman lead them to a living room arranged like a photograph. Teacups aligned, hymn books stacked under a vase, frames crowded with church picnics and winter coat drives. Copper Creek hung in the room without being named, like a smell you can't call out. I managed operations, Agnes said, hands folded. Supplies, schedules, community partnerships. The last word felt polished. Rowan asked about 1983, Late summer into fall, any emergency closures or after-hours transports. Agnes's gaze touched a familiar photo, her younger self standing beside a man in a suit, and drifted back. "We streamlined placements," she said carefully. "Young adults adrift needed stability. Certain partners specialized in that." A breath later she added, "We were under pressure to do more with less." Rowan kept her voice even. "I've got reclassification forms that move residents from transitional to specialized in days. The signatures belong to Dr. Lionel Keats." Agnes's mouth made a small shape, pain or surprise, hard to read. "Dr. Keats was respected," she said. "He served this town a long time." The teapot clicked, steam curled. Rowan asked if Program 7 meant anything. Agnes smoothed the tablecloth until the fabric couldn't be any flatter. "We called nothing by that name," she said. "But every system invents nicknames when it wants to forget what it's doing." They sat in a quiet that measured both women. Through the window, a dog led a boy down the sidewalk by a taut red leash. Rowan pictured Noah on a similar street, 19 and stubborn, the world still pretending to be simple. Agnes reached for a folder she had not said she would share and offered a single sanitized page, a community audit praising Copper Creek's efficient transitions. The language was immaculate, the margins were blank. It felt like a floor that wouldn't take a footprint. Rowan thanked her, stood to leave, and met a look that belonged in a different decade. "Some choices were made for the greater good," Agnes said, hushed. "The records are cold. The people were complicated." It wasn't an admission, not in any courtroom sense, but it wasn't nothing. Rowan drove west to a retirement community outside Helena where the sidewalks curved around immaculate lawns and every doorbell chimed in tune. Lionel Keats opened his after the third ring, tall and thinned by time, the kind of face you remember from waiting rooms and school gyms. He didn't pretend he hadn't heard the name Copper Creek in years. He didn't reach for a lawyer. He stepped aside and let the past into a room lined with medical diplomas and photos of little league teams he'd patched together. "How many forms?" he asked without greeting. Rowan placed photocopies on the coffee table, dates stacked like rail ties. He scanned in silence, jaw set, then sat back as if tired of holding his own spine. "We told ourselves specialized meant better care," he said finally. "State funding favored certain diagnoses. If a young adult was labeled severe, doors opened. But that was only the first lie." He looked toward the window. Transfers went out after midnight. Private ambulances. Paperwork routed through a foundation so no one had to approve what no one wanted to read. Rowan asked about PS 7. Keats closed his eyes like the illumination hurt. 7 was never a building, he said. 7 was a track. Once on it, a person didn't come back to local oversight. He folded his hands, fingers tremoring. "I signed because I believed the next stop would be a real hospital. And then I kept signing because I was a coward." The word landed without ornament. He rose, shuffled to a bookshelf, and returned with a thin envelope. "Insurance," he said. "Not money. Notes I made for the day someone asked. Names redacted, yes, but routes, dates, shell company filings. Granite Ridge appears because it was a hub. It wasn't the only one." The envelope held more than she'd dared hope. A photocopied organizational schematic, a lease reference linking Lemhi County property to a health foundation, a utility record for Building C reconfiguration. Rowan's heart pounded a precise count. "I can get you protection," she said. Keats waved it away like a housefly. "Protection arrives after reputation is ash," he said. "Just move fast." On her way back to Butte, Rowan called Detective Cole Ramirez and ran the highlights. He promised a quiet background scrape. No lights, no press, just pressure on utilities, shell charters, and transport licenses. "You'll have a window," he said. "Use it." She pulled into the station, logged the envelope, and headed to Agnes's address with a new set of questions that might open the floorboards. The street was already changed by the time she turned the corner. Cruisers nose to curb, yellow tape lifting in the light wind, neighbors gathered in small, uncertain knots. Inside, the living room had been staged to tell a simple story. Rowan knew better. The gun lay near Agnes's right hand. The pen on the end table showed fresh ink on a note that read like a confession and not at all like the woman's voice that morning. The tea service was gone, cups and all, though the saucers left faint rings on the lace. A chair had been dragged from the dining room and placed deliberately, its legs leaving tracks that didn't match the scuffs by the doorway. Rowan crouched and studied the carpet, the way threads crushed and sprang back. "She poured with her left," Rowan said softly, "and somebody cleaned what they needed to keep." Her phone vibrated, blocked number, one line on the screen, "Stop pulling. The dead deserve rest." Microhook. Someone in Butte was writing the epilogue before Rowan finished the first chapter. Rowan left Butte before sunrise, the highway unwinding like a wire pulled straight. Lemhi County records had given Granite Ridge a street that didn't exist on publicly posted maps, but utilities don't lie. Power draw spiked at midnight and fell before dawn, the pulse of a place that pretended to be empty. She tried her mother twice on the way south. Both calls went to voicemail, Marion's greeting steady as a metronome. Rowan told herself Marion was baking or in the garden or at church, then turned the volume down on that voice in her head and drove faster. The road shouldered towards Salmon, Idaho, into country that played quiet when you first arrived. Granite Ridge sat behind a row of spruce, its brick gone the color of old pennies, the parking lot stippled with weeds. It was the sort of building you'd swear had been abandoned since the state closed whatever it used to be. Then the front door buzzed once and clicked. A man in a white coat stepped out like he'd been waiting on her specific tire noise. He was mid-50s, careful posture, eyes that landed and stayed. "Dr. Vernon Adler," he said, extending a hand he had no intention of letting her refuse. "You found us efficiently." Rowan kept her hands at her sides. "You operate here without a public license," she said. Adler's smile acknowledged the fact without contesting it. "Licenses multiply where paperwork wants to be admired," he said. "We prefer results." He glanced at her empty hands, assessing the envelopes she hadn't carried in. "You brought copies," he said. "Prudent." He pivoted, the door yawning wider, the hall beyond clean and lit. "We both care about outcomes, Deputy Hale. Yours is finding the truth. Mine is preventing accidents." Rowan's phone vibrated in her pocket. A text arrived from a number she didn't recognize, a single line that cut her breath clean. "She's safe. Do not escalate." Adler watched her read it, the air between them sharpened. He nodded toward a small monitor mounted just inside the lobby. The screen showed a woman in a simple room, hair pinned back, hands folded in her lap like she was waiting on a doctor. Marion Hale looked up at nothing, then down again, unharmed, alert, contained. "A courtesy," Adler said softly. "She's comfortable. Your calm will keep her that way." Rowan made herself breathe evenly. Her pulse had its own plans. She walked into Granite Ridge without touching the walls. The corridor hummed at a frequency designed to remind you what you didn't control. Doors lined both sides, oak veneer disguising steel. A keycard thunked in every lock Adler passed. An elevator took them down through floors that didn't have buttons, just smooth paneling and the temperate breath of recycled air. When the doors opened, a placard precision printed on plastic read "C, longitudinal studies." No mention of intake. No mention of exit. The hall in Building C was narrow enough to insist on a single file. Through narrow windows, Rowan saw rooms organized for living without life, beds made with military corners, desks with no paper clutter, wardrobes holding 3 identical gray sets of clothing. People moved inside those spaces with practiced quiet. A woman in her 30s sat at a desk tracing the edge of a magazine that had no words, only pictures. A man in his 40s stood at attention in front of an unlit television like waiting was a program. Rowan's chest tightened with a particular anger. Adults, every one of them. No children in sight. No one who had chosen this. Adler spoke like a docent in a museum that only needed the right script to make sense. "These are long-term studies," he said. "We stabilize lives the world didn't have time to manage. We measure adaptation, resilience, response to structured routine." Rowan did not look at him. "You measure obedience," she said. "You measure how far a person can be pushed before the paperwork reads normal." She stopped at a door labeled C217. Inside, a man stood near the window, shoulders squared as if posture could hold a room together. His hair was threaded with gray, his jaw set with a habit that Rowan recognized like a song you didn't know you remembered. The plaque beside the latch didn't carry a name. It carried a code. K21. Rowan couldn't move for a second. Her throat went tight in the exact spot where Noah's laugh used to land when a joke hit late and hard. She lifted her hand, palm open, not a threat. The man turned slowly. His eyes took her in with solemn curiosity, not surprise, as if he had been expecting a shape roughly her size and was adjusting for detail. "Hello," he said, the word careful, as though he didn't get to spend them freely. "Are you the nurse?" The voice was older but not different. It hit the same old nerve. Rowan swallowed. "I'm Rowan," she said, not trusting any other syllables. She didn't say sister. You don't hand a word that big to a room like this with witnesses you can't see. He tilted his head like he was listening to something just behind her shoulder. Then his mouth softened. "There's a whistle," he murmured. "On the porch. Evening. A song that climbs and sits." He tapped his thumb twice against his forefinger, the slow rhythm he used to use when he was telling her to wait, to stay behind him, to let him go first. Rowan felt the floor unspool. "Mom still does it," she said. "Every night." Adler watched the exchange with clinical fascination and, just for a breath, concern. He reached toward a recessed panel near the door, a button shrouded in plastic. "This has gone far enough," he said, voice unraised. "We'll conclude now. Your mother will remain comfortable, contingent on your discretion." Rowan kept her gaze on K21. He stepped closer to the glass, hands visible, eyes clear. Something practiced fell away from his shoulders, and something older moved back in. "No more tests," he said, to no one and to everyone. The corridor behind them tightened, air pressure shifting as if the building itself had taken a breath. Adler's thumb hovered over the plastic shield, and the lights along the baseboard pulsed once in anticipation. Microhook. When the alarm sounded, it wouldn't be the only thing waking up. Adler's thumb pressed through the plastic shield. The corridor lights strobed once, then steadied to a low, humming red, the kind of alert designed to control breath and shorten decisions. K21 didn't flinch. He stepped to the wall and slid a fingertip under a narrow seam Rowan hadn't clocked, a maintenance panel shaved flush with the baseboard. The plate lifted with a soft sigh. He met her eyes, tapped twice, the old rhythm, and slipped into the dark space like he'd mapped it with the patience of 30 years. Rowan followed, shoulders grazing cold ductwork. Behind them, Adler spoke into a small lapel mic with a voice built for compliance. Containment C, Passive Response Protocol. The crawl space ran parallel to the hall, just high enough to move at a crouch. Air pushed through in timed pulses. 21 counted under his breath at corners, not numbers but patterns, as if the building taught him its heartbeat and he'd tuned to it. 6, he whispered. They always send 6. 2 peel to the medical wing. For lock the commons. His hand flicked right. Commons first. Fewer locks. Rowan's phone vibrated in her pocket. A message from Detective Cole Ramirez flashed and vanished before the signal cut, holding perimeter. Someone upstairs stalling permits. 30 minutes max. She slid the phone to airplane, resisted the animal urge to run, and moved. They emerged behind a steel service door with a thumb latch battered by years of keys. K21 leaned into it, not with force but with the patience that breaks a habit. The latch lifted. The door gave enough for a breath and a view. The commons was a rectangle of neutral paint and stainless tables, the kind of room a contractor would build when he's been told to design for order. 24 adults sat in neat pairs or alone, eating quietly from divided trays. Not drugged out, not panicked. Just small, like their lives had been folded to fit a drawer. Rowan stepped out first, palms up, badge visible, voice low. "My name is Rowan Hale. I'm here with someone you know." She moved aside. K21 walked into view. The effect was instant and silent. Heads lifted and stilled, a current moving through the room that bypassed the throat and landed in the lungs. A woman in her 30s covered her mouth with a flat palm, then lowered it and squared her shoulders. A man in his 40s stood, spine straight, like standing had been trained out of him and he'd taken it back. No one rushed. It felt like a flock deciding to change direction without calling a vote. "No more tests," K21 said, clear and simple. "We leave now." Rowan worked fast. She clipped her micro-recorder to the collar of a chair and let it roll, then started photographing what mattered: the whiteboard listing adaptation metrics, the schedule that slotted observation block C between quiet hours and nutrition review, the cabinet of binders whose spine labels used words like longitudinal and compliance to make cages sound like spreadsheets. In a drawer she found a laminated evacuation map stamped with a red C and a dotted path labeled service tunnel garage. She held it up to K21. He nodded once. "I've crawled it," he said. 3 turns. 1 great. In the corner, a wall cam blinked, then froze and stayed frozen. Somewhere above, someone had tripped a switch. 2 guards hit the main door like a clock strike. Rowan put her hands out wide, stance a shield, not a challenge. "These are victims," she said, calm and firm. "Step wrong and your career ends on a frame of video." The taller guard faltered, eyes flicking to the dead camera. The shorter went for a radio. It hissed and spat useless air. K21's voice found a register Rowan had never heard from him, something steady and oddly gentle. "There's a map in the floor," he told the guards. "You've seen it. It ends with everyone breathing." That sentence shouldn't have worked. It did. The shorter guard took his thumb off the mic and didn't press it again. Rowan moved to the woman who had covered her mouth. "I need 2 people who aren't afraid of tight spaces," she whispered. "Then 2 more to help those who are." Hands rose without negotiation. She took out her phone and showed a photo she'd taken that morning. A sky over Butte, unremarkable and endless. "This is waiting," she said. "Outside isn't a rumor." The woman leaned in until the light of the image cut a line across her face. "I remember wind," she said, as if confessing a forbidden pleasure. "It hurts your ears and then you laugh." Rowan nodded. "We'll take the hurt," she said. "We'll take the laugh." They followed K21 through the service door and into the tunnel, single file. In that space, trust became choreography. Rowan counted heads at each turn, cataloging faces like evidence because evidence lives after fear. Midway through, low and distant, came the heavy thump of a secondary door slamming, the medical wing locking down. 3 there, 21 said, eyes closing like he could see through concrete. "They call it pre-transfer." The word chilled without blood or blades. Rowan touched his sleeve. "We're coming back," she said. "But first we need a door the law can't close without stepping on itself." The tunnel spat them into a low garage that smelled like damp tires and lemon cleaner. A shuttered bay door rattled against its frame as if working up a decision. On the wall, a panel labeled overrides held 3 switches and a keyhole. Tape residue outlined a rectangle where a sign used to be. Rowan tugged the center switch. Nothing. K21 reached around her and flipped the left. The bay door groaned as if waking. At the far end of the building, muffled through concrete, something else woke too, rotor wash, the chopping signature of a helicopter angling in over the spruce. Rowan's phone, back alive, lit with a text from Ramirez. "Hold. Federal eyes on route. Local order says wait. I'm ignoring it in 10. Somewhere behind them, a siren finally found its voice, a rising note that meant the facility had stopped pretending. The bay door climbed like an old animal getting to its feet. Rowan counted again and reached back into the tunnel with a hand for the last person. "Almost," she said. "Almost." In the corner, a digital display blinked a line of text and then went dark. Program 7, operational. The words vanished as if they'd never been there. Microhook. When the first barrel of daylight slid under the door, Rowan saw the shadow of one more person waiting on the other side. The bay door climbed by inches, the sound a tired animal makes when it decides to live. Light knifed across the concrete. A silhouette filled the gap, ball cap, vest, stance that meant perimeter, not panic. "Hale," Cole Ramirez called, voice clipped. "Hands." Then heads. Rowan showed both, then ushered the line forward, palms open, Faces lifted to the first daylight some of them had seen in years. No one ran. They learned the shape of sky first, then of air, then of choice. Agents poured in, quiet, practiced, without theater. Cole brushed past her, eyes flicking once to K-21, then to the tunnel mouth. "Medical wing?" he asked. Rowan pointed. 3 designated pre-transfer. He didn't ask what that meant. He sent a team. Radios bloomed with restrained language, doors forced, rooms cleared, vitals taken. Somewhere deep in the building, a lock screamed and surrendered. Minutes later, a medic's voice broke like water over stone. "We have them." No triumph, just relief that didn't dare smile yet. Adler appeared at the far end of the garage, flanked by 2 staffers who had lost the comfort of white coats. He raised his hands fast, cuffs of a linen shirt immaculate even under siren wash. "Deputy Hale," he said, as if this were a symposium and he was the only adult in the room. "You invited a stampede onto a glass floor." Cole cut him off without looking at him. "Dr. Vernon Adler, you're under arrest." The agent behind him read rights that sounded steadier than the building felt. Rowan stayed with the survivors in the shade of the open bay while IDs were taken, wristbands clipped, statements started. She took photographs because the future would need them, but she also did small, unrecorded things. Held elbows, named dogs and foods and radios for people who didn't yet have the words back for ordinary objects. A woman in her 30s closed her eyes under the wind from the helicopter and whispered, "This is the noise from the magazines." Rowan said, "It's noisy and we can step away." The woman nodded and didn't. They brought Marion out 2 minutes later, upright, furious in that quiet way that collapsed every year between them into a single breath. She saw Rowan, the iron in her shoulders melted, then she saw K-21. He stopped a yard away, not from fear, habit. Marion lifted a hand and whistled, 2 notes that climbed then settled on a porch they no longer owned. He laughed, a sound that still belonged to 19, and the room of people moving and blinking and coughing reshaped around 3 Hales learning a new arrangement of the same story. Marion didn't say Noah like a question. She said it like a fact that had waited in the table drawer with the bus ticket until now. He put a hand on hers as if it might vanish if he gripped too hard. Paperwork surged after that. A flood. Rowan surfed like someone who had been practicing her whole life without knowing what for. The micro-recorder from the Commons gave an honest chronology. The ham log pinned a convoy to a night and a pass. The death certificates in Keats's thin envelope showed intent to erase without saying it out loud. Utility records mapped the heartbeat of a building that pretended to be dead. A foundation's lease filled the air gap between money and harm. The camera freeze proved sabotage. The service tunnels were photographed, sketched, measured. This wasn't a tip, it was a ledger. By spring of 2014, in a courtroom in Helena where the ceiling arches made everybody a little smaller, Truth put on a suit and crossed to the witness stand. Keats testified without decoration, bones and tremor and remorse. He walked through forms and signatures and the long, sloping curve of a good man who ran out of courage at the wrong time and then mistook habit for duty. The defense tried to sell therapy and stabilizing care. The binders in evidence refused to play along. The jury's faces didn't change much during the verdicts. Decency doesn't always throw a parade. Adler took a sentence long enough to measure his life in institutional time. 2 administrators got quarter-century stretches. A state official who had strangled inspections for years took 15. The foundation rep who leased the shell space without asking too many questions learned what conspiracy sounds like when someone else reads it back to you. 25 survivors began names again. 18 had families who had kept an empty chair at holidays and a light in a back window longer than neighbors thought sensible. 8 chose quiet apartments in towns that didn't ask, where a social worker knew which cupboard to stock first. They fell in love with unremarkable things: burnt toast, an unlocked door that stayed unlocked, a laundromat's hum. They learned the useful pettiness of arguing with a cashier about being shorted $1 and the holiness of telling a joke no one else gets and laughing anyway. Not everything mended neatly. Some things refused. Noah asked for a garden that first summer. He and Marion killed basil and then learned what too much water looks like on leaves. He started counting not footsteps in a corridor but chickadees on the fence. He had bad nights. He edged away from doctors, then, slowly, edged back. Rowan taught him to drive again in the grocery store lot on Sundays. He braked hard at ghosts only he could see and then, over weeks, at none. He kept the bracelet but put it on a nail by the back door, a relic and a promise. Sometimes he tapped the old 2-count when he sat with his coffee. Sometimes he didn't. Evan Pike showed up one afternoon with a camera he didn't use and a 6-pack he didn't open. He stood near the raised beds and asked if Noah needed lattice. Noah said yes, and they built the crisscross out of scrap wood with warps you could forgive because the tomatoes didn't mind. Cole stopped by with news that quietly mattered. A disc slipped under his office door, a photo of a corridor stamped PS 7, Unit North. It turned out Granite Ridge was a hub, not a world. The work wasn't finished. It had simply learned Rowan's name. What lasts isn't the horror, it's the inventory of hands that refuse to let go. The lesson reduced. Records can be forged, but small, stubborn marks of love outlive almost any system. Count the signs, not just the signatures. Ask again when the answer looks too neat. If a place insists it's empty, check the lights at 2 a.m. When fear says wait, breathe, and move. Our names are the quiet rebellion we get to keep.